Welcome to PICT Voices, the interview series conducted by the faculty of the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking with notable members of the broader PICT community. Our goal is to present our community with a variety of voices across the spectrum of the humanities and critical creative thinking. My name is Anton Bonnici, and today it is my pleasure and honor to be joined by Mr. Wolfgang Pannek, author, director, performer, translator, producer, and editor. Wolfgang is co-director of the Taanteatro company in Sao Paulo, Brazil since 1994, and has co-authored alongside Mauro Baiocchi a notable number of texts documenting the practice and theory of the Taanteatro company, the latest of which is the 2020 publication, Choreographic Theater of Tensions, Forces and Forms. He has also published articles on the writing of Gilles Deleuze, and it is this interesting engagement of theatrical practice with theoretical underpinnings that has piqued our curiosity even further in Taanteatro's beautiful work. Welcome to PICT Voices, Wolfgang.
Hello, Anton. Nice to see you and to listen to you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So the opening question is, in fact, taken from this latest publication about Taanteatro, where in the Dance of Concepts, from your recent publication, Forces and Forms, you explain how the company name Taanteatro is translated into choreographic theater of tensions, with one of your most central concepts being that of the tension principle. Would you please introduce us to the world of Taanteatro with some further elaboration on this concept of tension as interpreted and explored through Taanteatro's practice?
Yeah, this will be a pleasure. You see, the book was published in 2020, our first book in English. We already have several books in Portuguese and one in Spanish. But it was our intention to reach a broader audience with our ideas and practices, and also, and somehow to open up to different groups, social groups and national groups, and so on, because in one way or the other, when you are working in Brazil, and if you are working even as a choreographic theater with Portuguese language, this is somehow restricting the dialogue and the audience that you eventually might have. So we decided to write a book in English, and this book gives you a kind of overview of our concepts, our practices, and our trajectory. In particular, the trajectory also of our founder, Mauro Baiocchi, a Brazilian choreographer and director. And well, she founded our group in 1991, which is actually today like something like 30 years ago. And I can tell you that this is not such an easy thing to maintain a group in Brazil for such a long period. And yeah, since the beginning, the work of Taanteatro was this kind of mix of practical activities, of course, performing arts activities. Mauro is a dancer and was initially a dancer, a performer, who liked to develop her activities in a variety of places, also in nature and outside, and performing often without actually conceptualizing all the stuff that she did in the beginning. But after some time, there was this tendency to also conceptualize your own work, her own work in that case. And step by step, this became more or less a permanent aspect of the work. So when I entered the company, which was in 1992, it already existed for about a year. And at this time, people were working on a work that was called The Deaf Book of Alice. See Alice in Wonderland, the character of Lewis Carroll. So this was a 6-hour piece in which, but Alice was actually, how you say, she was abducted from Lewis Carroll's book to the underworld of the Tibetan Book of the Deaf and stuff like that. And so when I came to learn the group, everybody was practicing every day for hours, a lot of physical training. And at the same time, people were trying to work on the concepts that Mauro started to develop about 1 or 2 years earlier, more clearly. So Taanteatro which comes from the word tan, T-A-N, which is, it's a root comes from, I say, Sanskrit. It's a Sanskrit word, tan, and means tension. And it's also the word that is in tan, which is in dance, Tanz in German. In German, you see it very clearly, T-A-N, tan, tanz, dance, dance, etc., etc. So the tan comes from this word, which at the same time means tension in Sanskrit. So it has a wide denotation. And so Maura added an A, another letter, because she wants to stretch the tension a little bit more. And so Taanteatro. And by time we came to a sort of translation, first it just meant theater of tension. And then because we got aware of the fact that the choreographic element is very strong, so that we thought, no, this should be the choreographic theater of tensions. And so tension, yeah, this was the first point, the essential point, that you should always pay attention to tensions, not tension in this restricted daily-like manner that we normally speak about when we say, this is very tense here, or there are international tensions, or what, always these kind of negative perception of the word tension. When you think about dance as something that is directly related to tension, for instance, physical tensions like muscle tensions, like torsions and so on, like spatial tensions, the way that the body relates to space. And the observer, for example, that sees a body on the stage perceives the body inside a certain area. The movement of the body is in some way related to the physical space in which it is happening. And you can speak of a sort of body-space tension because you see the body and the space interacting with one another. So there's this kind of energetic relationship between two or more different things. And regularly there are much more things involved than just two. Well, this kind of energy relationship between the very diverse elements that compose a theatrical or a performative action, this we call tension, which is about the difference of potential between things. So even you might have even tensions between, for instance, colors that you employ. Let's say you have a certain stage set, or you have a costume, or you have sound. There are immaterial and material elements. All immaterial and material elements of the performing artwork are somehow interconnected, and they are, let's say, interpenetrating one another, or they are in contact. And the difference of potential between this diversity of languages and elements, material or not, is a kind of composition of energy differences. And this is basically what tension is. And that means that you somehow, with the concept of tension, you are able to find a common denominator for everything that is happening. And that does not necessarily depend on meaning.
Okay.
It does, however, not exclude the possibility of meaning. So you have, for instance, you have a gesture that is not exactly necessary, and is not necessarily meaningful, but maybe it connects to something else, maybe a sentence, a word, or something that has a sort of social meaning, and you put the two things together, and then you might say, no, there is this energy element. Energy doesn't exclude, of course, doesn't exclude meaning, which sometimes people think. It's somehow prior to meaning, but it is at the same time connected. And actually what we are interested in, that's why the title of the book is also called Forces and Forms, is how energy processes and processes of generating meaning stay always in touch. Okay, so this would be a very essential aspect. First of all, just to repeat, tension is a kind of common denominator between all elements that compose a performative scene from our point of view. Tension by us is perceived not as something positive or negative. It is just something that happens.
It's there.
It's just there. It's like also in life. So you have all types of tension. You have pleasurable tensions. Consider, for instance, the body. When you like somebody, or when you are interested in something, or when you love, or when you are aroused by somebody, whatever happens, all these hundreds of little muscles and big muscles in your body make a certain performance. This relationship that you develop, this affection that happens between you and somebody else, transforms, modulates your body in some way. When you listen to a voice, you have a certain physical reaction. You are affected by this, and this complex, this tension complex, which is your own body, somehow responds or interacts with this other sort of with the other body, for instance, or the environment that you are in. Okay, so
no, that's very interesting, and you've already started tapping into the area of the second question. As you said yourself, there's this process, right, of reflection and definition on these practices, and you just said that you started the process when you entered when you joined in 1992. Then you started that process of finding more definitions. And in fact, when I read the book, I took a look at Forces and Forms, and it was very interesting how the definitions are formed. And there's actually a very interesting list of these definitions that most of them explore very interestingly what you've just been saying. And do you feel that this process, this aspect of reflection and definition, feeds back into the performances? Like how does it kind of how does it form part of the cycle?
Yeah, I see what you mean, because there is often a disconnect between theory and practice.
Yeah.
People talk a lot, especially when you go to university. People like to make a lot of speeches. They seem to be the smartest persons on earth. And then you see what they are doing and you say, wow, nothing of what they just said is happening in front of me. So this is really a huge problem. And I have to admit that also I found that among the younger people for instance, in Brazil, today they have to read a lot of philosophy. They became, they have to be some sort of specialists in certain areas. Maybe they like to read a lot Deleuze or whatever. And there is a lot of, how you say it? They have to carry a lot of theoretical work, often not even related to the traditional theater or dance theorists, but actually to other areas, which is, of course, interesting. But you feel that somehow there is too much, the balance isn't very good. And often the professors don't know really, professors like to talk about the books, they read a lot, they have this kind of intellectual advantage about their pupils, and this puts them in a sort of power position, but it doesn't really mean that they are able to help in the creative development as far as the arts themselves are concerned. Okay, so this is sometimes something that we can observe a lot here. I don't know how it is in Paris or elsewhere, but this is something I noted a lot among people that work with us. So, but I have to tell you, Maura Baiocchi, basically the person responsible for the main concepts of our work, I collaborated a lot with the, let's say, the theoretical formulation and development of the basic ideas. So she is very concrete. And I have to say there are some people maybe who have certain talents. Let's say you have an intellectual talent, but you do not even how to work or to walk, you know. Somebody sits up, take a walk over there. Person just cannot get up from her seat or something. So no, in her case, I think this interrelationship is very intuitive. Having an idea, and you don't need, I don't know, I think often you don't need to go too deep in the intellectual elaboration of the concept. Actually, that's why they dance in our case. You see, the concept needs to dance. You have to be able to, it has to be able to move, to transform, and you have to be able to interact with it. That's why it's dancing somehow. So in our case, there was always a very straight connection between both things. Let's take the example that I gave in the beginning. You're a body. You are composed of a bunch of muscles, some very small, some very big, some intermediate. They are kind of muscle. Muscles are tension complexes, right? So you could say everybody is simply something that depends on establishing the variety of tensions. Any movement, any expression. If you laugh, you have more than 60 facial muscles or something in order to have to form your laughter, your smile. So you can see this, but now you can see this from a very technical point of view, if you want to, or you just say, no, let's see. So let's explore our muscle tensions of our body. So there you have a very concrete exercise. First, you will get conscious of these different muscles you have in your body and to see what they are able to produce. So we have, for instance, a practice which is called Mandala of body energy. This is a very essential tool that we use in our work, which is designed to synthesize the diverse faculties of a person. Let's say the physical aspects, the body, the bones, the muscles, the movement, perception, sensibility, thinking. Thinking is not welcome. Sometimes people think that they shouldn't think. No, just question is how to integrate your thinking so that doesn't become an obstacle to your other capacities. So this mandala of body energy is a kind of tool, which is actually an exercise, which is like 190 to 120 minutes long, generally, depending on the person that is executing the exercise. And in this exercise, the person step by step gets acquainted with different aspects of her or his body. Very slowly, very attentively, and then step by step, including more and more capacities or faculties, until the exercise is designed in several dances. One follows the other. And let's say it's accumulating. You do something very simple, then you introduce a second element, then you go back. That's the so-called zero position. You always go back to the zero position. You make a dance, then you go back to the other zero position. And you are somehow accumulating the experience. And this is the zero position is a kind of starting and finishing position. And it's also a transitional position. You always go back to zeros, there where all possibilities are. But you return to zero with an additional element, so that when you are in zero, and zero is actually the symbol of chaos. It's not just the absence of something. It's just like the non-manifest state. So you always go. You manifest something. You return to the non-manifest state, but which is actually far more energized. And at the end, after 6 dances, you come to the at the final dance, you come to the improvisation element. That is when you hopefully were able to integrate all your faculties, and then you start creating based on this. And then if everything works more or less well, then you will not find it. Sometimes you have these creation or improvisation techniques that people do something immediately, now do something very crazy. But after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you feel that people is drying out, just losing it, because nothing new is coming. Because this creation or improvisation exercise isn't really sustained by yourself. So in this mandala of body energy exercise, we have one dance which is called the states of matter. Okay, the states of matter. So you have liquid, gas, and you have solids, right? And you have the transitions. Actually, every state is actually something in process. You have very different solid states. you have very different liquid states, and you have different kinds of, how you say, gas. It's not liquid, it's gas. Well, I don't know the gaseous state. So, and we try to connect then the muscle work of the person, of the performer, different types of tension, very concretely, the density or intensity of muscle tensions related to the element. So the person is conducts herself to move through different states of physical, of muscular tensions, and trying to experiment not only the state, but also all the transitions from one state to the other. So there you have a very concrete exercise of how to experience something like tension on a very physical level in your own body, very elementary and very difficult, because it's not easy to be aware, not only to be aware, but also to work and to operate this tension system, which is your body.
Interesting. From what you're saying, I'm hearing how the theoretical aspects are not merely descriptive, but there's also an instructional aspect to it all, and it translates into actual movement. The theoretical aspect translates into actual physical exercise in the space, and that sounds quite lovely. That sounds quite lovely. Moving on to the next question, and I'm interested to see how this figure ties in, because Anton has been the subject of a number of performances by Taanteatro, and he is regularly listed as one of the company's sources of inspiration. So, what is this relationship that Taanteatro has with Artaud?
I would say in our case that for the beginning, it's always a question of love affairs, you know, or of some sort of passion. I mean, we can make a lot of theory about stuff, but maybe we say, no, when you start off with something, you must somehow feel affected by that. You must have we have some of these figures. We have Artaud, we have Nietzsche, and of course they are very interrelated. So there are certain recurring subjects. Maybe you have encounters at some point in your life, and these encounters somehow affect you. Maybe initially you do not even really know what's going on. Maybe you're just losing somehow balance because you have this kind of encounter. And I would say that in case of Artaud, this is part of the question. When we started to work on Artaud in 1996, it's 5 years after the founding of the company, because I came from Germany, and I started reading Artaud, I think when I was 17 or 16 or 17, and there was this kind of shock experience at the time. And but I didn't at the time before being in the group, and I didn't really know what to do about it, I have to admit, like in a more creative way. And then in the company at somehow point I said, Mandala, I think we should do something about Artaud. And by the way, his 100th birthday is coming. So in the year before, we had done this Buto and Related Arts Festival, Buto and Research Theater Festival, big festival in 3 cities simultaneously in Brazil. And then we had a lot of courage. We said, we make another festival. So we decided to go for Artaud. And well, I could tell you a lot about the big festival, but I will stick to our own work. Within the festival, I suggested to Maura that she also would create a performance space on Artaud. So this was our first work. It was called Artaud, Where God Runs with the Eyes of a Blind Woman. So a very strange title. Maura dreamed with the title, which was actually great because it has somehow to do also with a little bit of this surrealistic connection in Artaud. And by the way, there was not one word of Artaud in this first performance we did. It was just like Maura said, somehow inspired by his, let's say, shamanic and Momo energies.
Le Momo, oui.
It was like a resonance, you know. It was not so much like the attempt to reproduce Artaud or put his text on stage or something or represent the guy, Artaud it's himself. No, it was a kind of poetic resonance in her, coming from her knowledge about Artaud. So that was the first work. And of course, there were certain figures, like certain recurrent characters. But as a whole, it was a very dreamlike piece, very performative piece, and very anarchic in a lot of aspects. So this was our first experience. And we did this in 1996, 1997, and for some time. And performing this and developing the same work. And then there was a big leap, actually. And we really went on to go back. And now in the following year, this was very funny. This is one I have to tell you. In the next year, Mauder did another play. It was called Arara, Stories That the Bones Sing. Stories That the Bones Sing. And this was also, it was inspired by a dream. She dreamt about a guy. She had a dream with the group, the league of the worshippers of the main lie.
Oh.
And so it sounds a little bit strange at the beginning, but when you are living in a very corrupt political system, mm-hmm. or also circled by religious systems where you know that people are lying all the time, mm-hmm. and they're building their entire power structure on that, then it becomes less funny. It's funny, but at the same time, it's also serious. So, and the interesting thing in the play was that was our second work on involving Artaud. Mauder was doing something, I don't know if you know that in France, but it's called a psychograph. Mm-hmm. The psychograph is when people say that when people write books, listening to voices that speak to them, and they are just writing it down. You know, like écriture automatique.
Oui, écriture automatique, les surrealists. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is a kind of Brazilian version. Okay. That means that people, some spirit is talking to you. So she received Artaud's spirit, in the guy, the leader of the League of the Worshippers of the Lie, suddenly was interrupted by Artaud coming, speaking from beyond. So this was a comedy element, let's say. Suddenly there was like a voice against these power structures and so on, intervening in this supposedly very serious situation. So this was like you know, things that were happening in the beginning. And then I would say we had this big leap. And in 2014, for some reasons that I do not really recall perfectly well right now, we started to work very seriously on Artaud. We did we did 50 drawings to assess in magic in 2014. We did cartography in 2015, which consisted of 3 different plays. First, the trilogy. First was mainly based on correspondence with Jacques Rivière. The second one was mainly about voyage to Mexico, so it was strongly related to Artaud's trip to Mexico. And the third one was a return of the Momo. So we covered certain moments of his trajectory, mm-hmm. and exploring certain texts for this purpose. So this was like a 5.5-hour play in total, and which was very nice. We did it a lot of times for our conditions, within the material conditions in Brazil. Yeah, a lot. And I designed the last, because I was the author, let's say, together. Mauder was the choreographic director, but I was basically conceiving the plays. And the last part, I conceived in such a way that we could use it further on as a solo work that we also presented in Paris and in Rodez.
Yes, yes.
Which was Artaud Le Momo, which mm-hmm. is our version of it. So I don't know, we have at least 10 works, I guess, about Artaud, and we did also this. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic, I had this idea early in the beginning that we should work on The Theater and the Plague, because it's a pretty interesting text when it comes to, let's say, to the mental derangements provoked mm-hmm. by a plague, or that COVID turned out to be. Yeah. And so we worked on this. So this is, let's say, what we did. We did a lot of works mm-hmm. about this subject. And then there's of course the question of proximity. Why do you feel inspired or not by somebody? Which is maybe another aspect of that might interest you.
Exactly, because the relationship drove you for so long, right? You had all these performances, all this work. So they're clearly, as you said before, there's this tension in attraction. There was definitely some form of tension and attraction between the work you were already doing and the words and I like how you said the shamanic aspect of Antoninatto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. I think there is. You see, I think when you meet somebody, but when you meet the literature, the images, the character, like Artaud, if you don't reject, for some reason, this kind of encounter, then it has, at the same time, it has a very stimulating, at the same time, destabilizing character aspect to it. It is like, because a lot of your supposed certainties, they start to shake, Like
yes. That's the Artaud effect, right? He breaks down a lot of a lot of support.
Exactly. So you think about it. Exactly. Then this is pretty helpful, I would think, in the first place, because it's a kind of deconstructive process, which makes you reconsider. Artaud leads you to reconsider a lot of the stuff that you have been doing. If you are actually, for instance, the question in how far your practice corresponds to your theory, or if you are just like to talk around. If you like to listen to yourself or stuff like that. But when it comes to action, there is a huge gap between your ideas and at least your attempts to put them in practice. So this is one interesting challenge. There is, of course, the theater theory, let's say. I mean, in this, it has to be sure that Artaud wasn't really alone in the first place. When you think about the first conceptual aspects of theater of the cruelty, is not like entirely original when it comes to the question of multiplicity of languages, or that theater isn't really text-based in the first place, which is of course things that come to our encounter. Because our work is choreographic, we like to involve different types of languages. So there was already a lot of connection. But I think in a deeper sense, of course, the theater of cruelty goes beyond the technical aspects or formal aspects of theater making. At the end, it's like a totally reconstruction of a body. And there is also where the shamanic question comes in, because a lot of what Artaud says about in his late texts about what the theater of cruelty is actually a kind of shamanic ritual that somebody is performing somehow on her or himself. So the ritual death of somebody and the recomposition of a new body, and the body that somehow follows your own decision making or your own interests or whatever you think it's very hard to determine what one's own interests or will is. But anyway, now this is the point where you put you something that maybe we would call in Taanteatro, Artaud leads you to the point of your existential tension, the thing that really moves you. And to face this question, if you are willing to go to a limit in order to do what is actually important to you. And he is an extreme case, everybody knows him. Says asylum years and so on. So it's a very high price to pay if you are very radical. So these are some aspects, and then of course there is this mixture of how to mix a very rigorous approach to your work with something that is at the same time very radical when it comes to the question of your formalizations. you say no. Especially what I said before, this is maybe very important. How do you make it happen in your work that the forces that drive you and the forms you generate, that they do not at some point start to divorce? And then you say, well, this is just like, let's say this is really actually only the representation of a theater, for instance. Okay, and then you say, now somebody does a beautiful work, very well arranged, very nice, technically, whatever. You suggest that, but it's just not able to affect anybody. You see, then you say it about the athlete, the effective athlete, or the athlete of the heart, meaning that you get in touch. You cannot get in touch with somebody, or it's really hard to, I think so, to get in touch with somebody if you yourself are divorced from the forces that drove you to use a certain type of expression.
True.
So this is maybe something that I would say is the most, doesn't really matter what kind of stuff you do, what kind of theater, dance, or whatever, or if even in daily life communication. But this basic concern that you can also in daily life be a kind of athlete of the heart, as long as your expressive forms stay in touch with the forces that drive you existentially. This is maybe the biggest thing for me. And it doesn't really matter what kind of forms you produce, because as long as they have this characteristic. And it's also, it was never, that I have to say, it wasn't, we had never the idea to create a theater of cruelty or whatever.
Yes,
you know, we wanted to do our stuff. Some people do that.
Yeah, because there's always that temptation, or that pitfall, you know, kind of, it's a pitfall, I think, of turning it into a formulaic aesthetic that is just going to be reproduced. And I think that is the kind of experience I had that I can connect to what you've just been saying, that the form, it becomes separated from the process, because whatever is produced does not remain an impulsive, natural outcome of the process, but simply becomes a destination that is already known, and one is just filling in the gaps to make sure that the picture stays so to speak. And that is you're right, that is a trap. And of course Artaud is constantly fighting against that. It's in his nature, right? His nature is to literally always break things down whenever there's a risk of that happening. And that is Artaud's writing. Moving on, another term that Mara Baiocchi coined is the term of eco-performance, correct? Where she says it's designates a cycle of her works that investigates the play of tensions between body, ancestry, and environment. I found this very interesting, the introduction of ancestry there, body, ancestry, and environment. And you also had an eco-performance festival earlier this year, and there's another one coming up. So what is this eco-performance and the goals and the intentions of this approach, so to speak?
Maybe I would just like to, I'll try to be more concise this time. But I have to say that there is a connection, let's see, between the tension principle, tension on the one hand, so that you are always connected, things are always connected. And actually things are not really things. They are also tension processes or tension flows, if you speak like that. So you cannot really isolate. I mean, it sounds, everybody says, everything is connected. Well, okay, this is nice. But the question is, what do you make out of it, right? Also in creative terms. Now, and how does that kind of consciousness influence your practice, your life, your existential or artistic practice? So when you say, okay, things are interconnected, what actually is going on is always in this in-between sphere. And when you think from the tension principle, then your body is not restricted to your skin or something. You know, you're breathing, you're eating, you're looking, you're watching, and you are interactive with your environment. So you cannot divorce your body from the environment. When you think under the point of view of the tension principle, actually, of course, your body has a certain stability and independence, but not entirely. It's far away from being entirely independent from the environment. So body and environment are essentially connected from the start. There would be no body without some sort of environment. And at the same time, the body constitutes an environment. So I'm saying this because before we had the eco-performance, we had this idea of e-corporality. That involves this idea of an intrinsic relationship between body and environment, and how does this idea affect our way of performing? This constant co-presence of that, what you call your body, and other bodies and other elements of the spaces that you go through, that you live in. So on the one hand, we have this, and then simply we have this other passionate aspect that is somebody just starts working in certain things. And I think in Maura's case, it was absolutely like this. She just enjoyed to perform in very different spaces, not only on the stage, but also in urban spaces and natural spaces and so on, and to explain different possibilities of interacting. And there's, of course, a kind of maybe, let's say, organic or initial sensibility, however you want to call it, that just makes you feel related stronger to different environments that are not only the traditional stage environments. By the way, eco-performance can happen on a stage, can happen in any type of environment. The question is more, how do you relate to the environment? And do you understand that you are actually a part of it, and that you as a performer or the performers are part of the composition? And that the performance is not me. It's not like l'état c'est moi. Sometimes in the star system, you have a little bit this idea, or we are very self-centered. So we always think that we are the performance, and we are not aware of the fact that actually what the performance is happening in a composition of in-betweens of all the different elements that were designed to perform, to be the performance. So eco-performance has a lot to do with this, on one hand, of this notion that the performance arises in the in-between of the body-environment connections. And then, of course, it is important also politically speaking, because the thing came stronger up in the end of the 80s in Maura's case, and end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. In Brazil, we had this conference, the International Conference on Climate. Today we have one other conference. You see, decades
right now, yes.
Yeah, she performed at that time a work was called "When the Butterflies Get Lost." It's also an interesting title already, because when the butterflies get lost, it's a kind of symptom that the environment is getting bad. And so she performed at that time at this conference, and she called her stuff environment performance at the time, not eco performance. Then, for several reasons, the word changed at some point, and we started to have this ancestry. This is what you're coming up with. Okay, why is ancestry relevant to an eco-performance tool? Why is it, if there is, you could say maybe, well, the body environment performance, the relation imply in the first place something that is more spatial. There's a more spatial or physical element. The ancestry, now we're talking in a wide sense, that gives a sort of temporal dimension to this concept of when you say, you do something site-specific, like people say, well, you're talking about spaces, but you are still not invoking time. It is explicitly. So therefore, the term of ancestry. Now you have ancestry like, I belong to a certain group of people, of culture, of a cultural environment, and so on, which is also an environment, so to speak. But when we think about it in a larger sense, it does not only back to our ancestors, personal family ancestors or whatever, or the tribe that our family once belonged to, and so on, and its cultural formation. But as we know from biology or from Shakespeare, we are made of stardust. So you have also this cosmic ancestry. You have this ancestry that relates you to minerals, to plants, to animals, and to the whole variety of the biological, of the organic and non-organic cosmos that you are part of. So in this sense, you are talking with ancestors or you are in touch with ancestral aspects of life once you are performing in a certain environment. And the simple fact that you take this into consideration, not just as an abstract idea, but let's say, let's try you open up your senses, your sensation to this idea. It simply establishes, it's like, you know, like what Deleuze calls the image of thinking. Our kind of thinking and acting depends a lot of certain paradigms. And therefore, these transcendental ideas, they are that we are oriented by. They have a very strong effect on the way of how we conduct ourselves and our social life and so on. And so once you establish certain other ways of thinking things, you know, like this, when you say, "Oh, this is the Copernican turn," or something like that, you just switch around a little bit the idea that you make of things. This triggers sometimes, not always, sometimes different sorts of perceptions. Let's say you simply allow yourself to perceive things in different ways. So in this case, once you consider the ambience or the environment as a space made of ancestry that you have a relationship with, and I'm not talking about how people say like, sometimes people like to joke about this stuff as if we are not naive idiots or something. Like how they say kumbaya or something like that, peace and love and peace and so on. No, it's a conflictual and relation. All these relationships, you could say, okay, we are more like Heraclitus, you know, conflict is at the beginning, or Arthur would say dissonance, or we would say tension. So no, it's to be in an environment is always, it's not harmony only, it's conflict a lot of times, struggle and so on. But in any case, it's interdependence and collaboration and conflict. And so ancestry brings you this idea that you are in somehow in different sense related. And it also, from the performative point of view, and this is where I close the idea, once you think that you are interacting with something, let's say a plant, a stone or whatever, and you allow the possibility that you respond, that it's a bilateral relationship, it's mutual. It's not just you who is giving the cards, you know. Say, now I'm doing this. But then you see how new possibilities of expression arise once you open up to be touched by something that normally you wouldn't consider as a dialogue partner, right? What you say, oh, whoa, I'm not talking to a stone. What the stone is going to tell me. But this is exactly where we can say, then we come back to this shamanic question of Artaud.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is very interesting, the idea of opening new pathways of conversation, finding new aspects of relation and affecting you across time. I like a lot this. I like a lot this concept. You also work a lot internationally, right? So you have a lot of international collaborations, and right now you've been working with the Mozambican dancer George Nlozi.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've seen recently the video on Hamilton Necropolis.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed looking at his, apart of course from the actual choreography and the physicality of the movement, but there was something about this connection to earth, connection to earth and earth-like substances and earth-like and dust and feeling in that work. How is this about Brazil meets Mozambique? How does this, what kind of conversation is created there?
Yeah, I will tell you. Maybe first of all, I have to say that Maura, in some point, decided to study in Japan. She studied in the 1986, 1987. She studied Buto with Ono and Tanaka. She went to Europe. So this international element belongs to the early phases, let's say, even before our creation or as a group. And you see, I'm German, she's Brazilian, the guys from Mozambique. We have now a painter, performer friend, which is also part of the company. She's from Argentina. And so, yeah, we have this idea of this transcultural approach, let's say. But it's not so much about conceptualizing, actually, let's be transcultural or something like that. It's more like things happen, I would say. It's like, because we could you make some theory about it afterwards, and then maybe it's also interesting to do that. But I think things, once you are directed in a certain way, then things start to happen. Then maybe you meet people that you would say you have some sort of effective relationship, and you want to work with the person. And this was somehow the case with Jorge and Josi. In 2005, we went to Mozambique. We were invited by a producer, came out of nothing, so to speak, for me. Somebody picked you up on the internet and started to suggest to work. And so a lot of struggle to get the money to go there, but finally we could do it, and we did a work there. In 7 weeks, we collaborated with the company that George came from. It was called Company of Chant and Dance of Matola, which is a city close to Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. Well, George ended up being doing the important solo performance in this work. He was very young at the time, so he was like 21 or something. But he was very nice, very impressive, and very responsive. And a lot of years later, in 2017, our company was doing like 25 years. We had this idea we should bring together some people that worked with us at some point for sort of commemoration of relationships and creative interaction and so on. We invited George to come to be part of 1001 Plateaus, our work on Deleuze and Guattari. And he came, he performed, and he was interested in staying in Brazil. And we worked very well together. So what does George bring to our group? Well, first, he is a very good dancer. And he is very open-minded when it comes to any kind of proposal. He is not like a big intellectual or something, but he is very, intelligent when it comes to his physical understanding of what can happen on stage. He is far more developed than a lot of people that I know that can talk a lot about philosophy of social sciences or whatever. So he's very perceptive. He has an impressive sensibility and great skills also. And he just, I don't know, this is a very, also I would say it's more like a personal confession or something that you can say. When you propose something to him, when we talk with one another, or he proposes something to us, it happens on a very intuitive level. It's not, we say, no, we want to work on this. Okay, we have found some sort of language to talk about this. And let's say my first thing that I wanted to do was make a dance about power and how to be on a throne, the place of power. That was basically the starting point. How to work on the fact that you occupy a place of power. And I don't know, we had this, it's sort of a little bit magical also sometimes that somebody just has a great understanding of that. And then they have this Maura and they have a very good relationship between choreographer and dancer. So he brings this kind of knowledge that he has from traditional dances and contemporary dance. And then he started to learn our techniques and so on, step by step. And I think it's a very nice combination. So we did a number of solo works. We did messages from Mozambique. We introduced his original language in our works, which is Shangana. It's an African language, which is also very enriching because for me it was very interesting because you see, for us actually, I do not really understand, let's say, what's going on, what is being said, but I understand the language under a more musical point of view. or as a on its energetic or material level, and not so much on what it means or denotates or whatever. And this was also very interesting because somehow the contact with other languages, let's say you speak English, French, or whatever, and our guys here, they started to learn his language so they could sing together with him in certain moments. So this remodulates your body. This is also important. This is maybe also, you suddenly, you open up yourself to different types of sensibilities once you try to practice languages that are not yours, so to speak. So these are some of the things, and of course there is a political element also, because it brought us to discuss question of colonization, how colonization acts upon the bodies, especially, for instance, when we come back to the question of languages. There is not only the physical part. Let's say, how is the training, how is the conditioning of a colonized body, and or how are the different types of conditionings? Not there is one body which is conditioned and the other is not, but these kind of encounters, interpenetrations, and all violence, and sometimes or the positive contamination between different types of conditionings, and so on. All this was stuff that we were studying, including the question of language. Let's say the same guy is making a monologue, speaking some sentences in Portuguese, a bunch of sentences in Shangana, and how these things intersect, and from the perspective spectator's point of view, because you listen to one sort of rhythm and sound and so on, and then you jump over to the next one. And it makes you, like, when you listen to different languages at the same time, and you feel that it makes you shake a little bit, you are losing a bit with certain ground. And at the same time, it's interesting. So these are some of the, just spontaneously pointing to some elements that I think are of interest.
Very interesting. Yes, very interesting. And this idea of a new language actually affecting even the perception of one's body, and the different dynamics that are created therein is quite that's quite a strong image. It's quite a strong image. Thank you a lot for all of this. We've spoken a lot about these different aspects of Taanteatro, and my final question would open up more to with regards to today's world and theater's place in today's world. After these last few months with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that's meant for theater. We've had a lot of theaters being closed, and a lot of theater companies being affected, but I feel there was also this new awareness of how close theater brings people together. And of course, this has also given us a new perspective on the very idea of proximity to people. We've been for many months we've been told, keep your distance and don't go next to people. And of course, what we do in theater is the complete opposite. We want to bring people as close as possible together, even more. So where do you think that all of this leaves theater today, from your experience? Where does it leave theater today?
I want to reply to your question, but I just want to make this maybe this connection with the question you made before, because Hamlet in Necropolis is part of a project that we are doing now, and we started it during the pandemic. So I think it's interesting and useful to establish a connection between how to react to the pandemic.
Yes.
What it does is triggered by it. So I mentioned before, we did this project on the theater and the plague. It was an international project which brought us in contact with people from several continents. So in this case, you have to say, because I wanted to make an interpretation of the theater and the plague from the point of view, from a pandemic point of view, multiple entrances. And so actually, as you said, this project brought us in contact with a lot of people from Thailand, from Russia, from Tunisia, and elsewhere. So that I'm mentioning this because it's an opportunity. Now, see, crisis, you say, crisis is always an opportunity as well, or can be, right? You can see something You say, oh, there is an obstacle, I cannot go on, or you can try to jump over it or find a way to cross the obstacle. So I think the same thing with Hamlet in Necropolis, which is also this project. We are still working on this. In this case, Necropolis has to do with COVID. So concretely, Brazil, was very hardly affected. 600,000, more than 600,000 deaths up to now. So here, the images you saw happened on the biggest cemetery of South America. So it was a mess. It was horrible when all these people were dying. You see the bones in the film. Yeah, we were actually exposed. You would be walking in the middle of bones in a cemetery. So this was really rough. So I have to say, from a personal point of view, I didn't feel that the pandemic stopped us in our work. Actually, we very quickly shifted our perception. So where are we? How do we conduct our creative energies under the given circumstances? And also stimulated by these circumstances, as not only just to continue working, but also, how do you work not only with the situation, but also on the situation? So what does the pandemic tell you? And how does it become a subject to your work, right? So this was actually, I have to say, a very immediate and even I have to say easy. Not easy the subject itself. Subject is horrible, but it was just there, so strong, so you could work on it. You have a strong subject. You do not have to look out. Is there an interesting play you want to do? No, there is a major subject right in front of you, around you. Okay, so this is an opportunity to work on stuff that is actually determining your time. I mean, your history, the historic moment you live in. This is maybe a very rare opportunity that you have. Say, wow, if you're not doing a theater that reproduces already existing plays, but if your kind of theater or dance work is based on approaching subjects of your time by creating the plays. So I think the pandemic is a gigantic subject, and very hard to grasp because we are still in the middle of it. Now, of course, there is a lot of people suffered a lot from this because they lost their possibility of their habits, their performing space, opportunities, the money that they used to have. Now in Brazil, we are pretty much accustomed to crisis. I have to tell you, having money for your work has always been a struggle here. So we are, let's say, struggle proofed. It's not like, I lost my job. Yeah. Something like that. You never had a job in the first place. So you always have every year to fight again. And you have the feeling that you never really leave the place where you started from in a lot of ways. Like you have no financial security at no point of your career, or if you want to call that a career. So I think this also makes a difference. From which angle, from which geographical and social and political point do you experience a disruption like this? If you are accustomed to a very comfortable lifestyle with your fixed salary for years, and then suddenly says you cannot work anymore because the theater is closed, then your perception is certainly very different from somebody who never lived these tranquil, this quiet, or these comfortable circumstances which you may also, this is something, I'm German, so I can tell a little bit about it. As Europeans, we are sometimes think that our lifestyle is somehow a human rights issue. Yeah. We have a guarantee somewhere written in the stars that we should live that way, and that's actually the standard how life should be, and everybody else is messed up. So there is this sometimes a limitation that how to understand. No, in very different places of the world, things are seen differently. And then sometimes you might even say, okay, I would say, some things get lost, let them get lost. You know, if you're not able to survive a crisis like this, then maybe it's okay like this. It's not just like things go broke and you say, oh, that's so sad, or that's just a pity. Maybe you just say, well, there wasn't a lot of reason for them to exist anyway, except this institutional aspect of being a professional in a certain area. So from an artistic point of view, I think a lot of people suffer a lot and so on, of course, because you are accustomed to a certain lifestyle. But I think this, let's say, from a different point of view, it gives you a lot to reflect about, of your own habits, of the way you see things, of the kind of consumer lifestyle you have, and so on. You say, this is not how my life should be.
True.
And now the point that you made about the encounter, this is something you said about the theater as something that has to do with being together, having encounters, meeting people. Yeah, I think this, when you are, if you are, how to say that, deprived, if you have not the opportunity any longer to meet people, I think this gives us also an interesting opportunity, because in some cases you say, you know what, I do not even miss the guy. Or sometimes you see that your certain habits are automatized, and others that are really essential, that you say, oh, this is really something this has to change again, and we have to find a new way. And then maybe to say, not only things have to get back to normal, but what is this new, well, okay, when we come back together to be together again as artists in that case, so what is important for us? What makes the encounter really relevant? What is the essential part of this encounter, which is constituted by the theatrical situation? And in how far does this situation that we are living in tell us something about the of the types of communication that we would try to explore when we work in our field? And this is something I think that well, it's like when you are forced to stay out of something for a long time, and then you go back eventually step by step, and you have a learning process to do. And I think that can be very useful, actually, I have to say, because it puts us out of our comfort zones. It makes us question what kind of type of communications are really important to us, what not, what styles of communication, etc., etc., etc. And maybe, and also the fact that maybe you said, some things I didn't really miss. I think this is interesting, you know? Sometimes you notice that you thought something was relevant to you, and then you notice this is not as relevant as you're always supposed to be. Yes. So this, I think though, in this way we have something positive about is that maybe we can consider our own selectiveness to cultivate the things that are really matter to us, everybody, in a certain fashion. It's not like to be generalized, and also say, no, this is not so important anymore for me. We can skip this part.
It's an opportunity to rediscover once again what is truly essential.
Yeah,
what is truly essential. Well, thank you very much for all this. This was a lovely chat, and thank you for being with us. And I would like to thank also all the PICT Voices listeners. I hope that this discussion gave you some insight into the work of the Taanteatro company. And do look them up. Do look up Taanteatro on the different platforms like YouTube and online and social media, because there's a lot of beautiful work there to be discovered. Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you.